Well, greetings viewers and voyeurs, gothatfunk here, in a video response to my good friend The Reprieve, who from here on out I'm going to refer to as Jay because we're friends. We've known each other here on YouTube for about a year and a half now. And we've always been good friends, even though we have vastly differing worldviews, you know. By his own estimation, Jay is a right-wing Christian, whereas I am a loony, lefty, tree-hugging, bleeding heart liberal atheist. Anyway, despite the differences in our worldview, we've always managed to see past that to the person. And wouldn't it be nice if it was that way more often? Anyway, I want to do a video response to Jay's video about his salvation moment. Many times over the past year and a half, I've heard Jay refer to his salvation moment in videos and in comments to videos. And, it apparently has completely transformed his life in a good way. And Jay, this video is not in any way meant to diminish that or try to take that away from you or criticize it at all. That's not where I'm coming from. However, I personally have had a salvation moment as well, which changed my life for some time. And I thought it would be interesting just to share and, compare maybe. Right, so first a bit of background. I grew up in a completely non-religious household. We didn't even have a Bible in our house. And the only time I ever heard my parents mention God was when they were swearing. And that's the truth, man. Now, obviously from the culture, you pick up bits and bobs here and there. Sometimes at school, we would talk about stories in the Bible. I specifically remember when I was 8, I disproved the flood of Noah. And asked my teacher questions that she couldn't answer. And I also remember hearing a little bit about Jesus Christ and his crucifixion. However, I didn't get the salvation aspect of that story until I was almost an adult. When I was 16, I started working at a roller skating rink. When I was 16, it was 1978, by the way. And I started working at a roller skating rink, and the roller rink that I was working at was staffed almost exclusively by Christians. In fact, for the first year that they were open, they only hired kids from church. They only advertised jobs in churches. I was literally on the first induction of people who were hired from outside of a church. So I was completely surrounded by born-again Christians at this job, and they started to find out that I didn't believe. Now, back then, when I was 16 and 17, I was incredibly scathing as an atheist. I didn't really identify as atheist. I didn't really know the word as such. I mean, I might have heard it, but didn't really think about it too much. But I used to be completely mocking of the idea of God. I would mock my friends for believing something so preposterous as a being created the entire universe. To me, it was self-evidently absurd, and still is. But I've learned better than to mock people for it, most of the time. Anyway, so I didn't really know about this whole idea that Jesus was killed with an eye towards saving humanity. I thought Jesus was killed on the cross because he claimed to be the Son of God, and they were punishing him for his bold claim. I thought he pissed off the clergy and got killed for it, basically. And to some degree, he did get killed for pissing off the clergy. However, I didn't really know anything about salvation, that by believing in Jesus you could get a ticket into heaven or anything like that. I didn't know at all. So you can imagine my surprise when I started going to church, because what happened was a couple of months before I turned 18, I got a girlfriend who was a preacher's daughter. Her father was a Baptist preacher. And sometimes the family would invite me to come with them to church, and as a courtesy to the family, I would sometimes go along, even though they knew of my objections. The whole family knew I didn't believe. The whole family didn't hold it against me, and I think they had it in their head that they were going to guide me towards Christianity. And they did, but not in the way that you might presume. I mean, basically, here's what happened. My girlfriend was the star in a church play called The Clown. Now, some of you Christians watching this may have seen this story in a play before, because I take it it's a relatively commonly done play. Anyway, when I had been in church many times and they call for people to, come forward and give themselves to Jesus and confess their sins and begin the process of becoming born again. Well, I used to just, when people would go do that, I would watch with horror. Like, why would you submit to that? Why would you do that? Why would you pretend that you need to be saved from something when there is no something to be saved of, because there can't possibly be a God in the sky somewhere? It just didn't make any sense to me. I felt that they were sheep, really. And I didn't want to be involved with that. But, as I say, as a courtesy to my girlfriend and her family, I would go to church sometimes. And I was watching her do her dress rehearsal for the play. And, so I knew the whole story of the play. And it didn't really move me in any way, shape, fashion, or form. The play was about a clown who basically is a Christian. And he gets called the clown because he gets mocked by virtually everyone for his beliefs, or her beliefs, since my girlfriend was the clown. Anyway, the point is that when it came for the actual play to be performed in front of the whole church, and we're talking about the whole congregation was there and attending guests as well, the church was way more full than normal. And at the end of the play, the preacher, who in this case wasn't my girlfriend's father, different preacher, called for people to come forward to confess that they were a sinner and to give their lives to Jesus Christ, to admit that they needed Jesus. And I was sitting there next to my girlfriend's mother and brother in the pews with my head bowed, my eyes closed. And I did not want to get up. And when I say I didn't want to get up, I mean my conscious mind did not want me to get up. I literally tried not to get up. However, I was overcome with this feeling that I really, really can't possibly put into words adequately. But I felt, there's no better word for it, I felt possessed by some sort of force that I couldn't possibly explain or understand, which shot me up to my feet, crying. I was bawling my eyes out, and I did not want to go. I didn't want to go forward, partly because I didn't really believe in God, and I didn't want to go forward as well because I didn't want my girlfriend or her family to think that I was doing so to reward her for her performance in the play, or because it was expected of me or anything else. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to go forward. I didn't want to confess myself as a sinner. I didn't want to. I can't stress that enough. I literally tried with my conscious brain not to, but it seemed like I was a puppet and I was being forced to my feet by a force which was completely beyond me. I was compelled to do it in a way which I can't possibly describe. And I went forward, and the preacher asked me to kneel down in front of him, and I was bawling my eyes out. And he said, "Do you feel the need for Jesus, Paul?" And I said, "I think I do." And he patted me on the shoulder and said a prayer, and asked me to go back and sit down and meet him at the end of the service. So I met the pastor at the end of the service, and I was still quite shaken up. I was shaken up more about the fact that I didn't seem to be in control of myself for the first time in my life than any other factor. But I was clearly moved. And when I went to talk to the pastor in his office, I said to him, I said, "The thing is, I don't believe in God, so I don't understand, what's going on here." And he explained to me that a little bit of confusion is understandable, especially for someone who wasn't raised up in the faith. And that rather than worrying about feelings about, whether or not there's such a thing as a God, that I should read the Gospels, get to know Jesus. And he explained to me that the force that compelled me to move to my feet was the power of the Spirit, that I was being moved by the Spirit, that of course my brain couldn't stop me because the Spirit is stronger than the mind. And all of these things tumbled about in my confused mind, and some of it seemed to make sense because I could not explain why I got to my feet, why I went forward, why I had said I was a sinner and had needed Christ. I couldn't explain it. Well, my girlfriend, of course, was on the stage crying her eyes out as she saw me, and her family was quite moved as well. And the entire congregation the following Sunday made me feel more welcome as a part of their group than I think I've ever felt in my life. I've never fit into groups before. I've always been that guy on the outside. I've always been something of a loner in my life. And so to feel welcomed by these people was overwhelming to me. It was like being given a family, an extended family. And all of these things buoyed my feeling that maybe I was compelled by this thing called a spirit that I didn't even think existed. Maybe I was. Maybe there was more to it than I had actually prepared to acknowledge in my arrogant intellectual approach to life. So I started reading the Gospels. Well, in fact, I should redress that. I actually read the book of Job first, because I actually was going to read the Bible from start to finish, but my girlfriend's father said to me that that's not really a good way to read the Bible. If you're going to be a Christian, it's better to read the Gospels first and then get into other parts of the Bible afterwards. But me, I'm a nonconformist, so I read Job because it's a pretty short book in the Old Testament. And then I went on to read the Gospels, and from there I read the rest of the New Testament, and then started getting into bits of the Old Testament and so on. Anyway, I was a Christian from that point onwards for a few years. I was quite happy to go with my girlfriend and her family to church every weekend for the rest of the year 1980. Almost the rest of the year, anyway. We broke up in December of that year. And because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable or to feel uncomfortable myself, I didn't go to her church anymore. I found a different church. My roommate went to a church called the Open Bible, and it was a non-denominational church, quite evangelical. It was a completely different atmosphere to the Baptist church I was going to. I mean, in the Baptist church, occasionally when the preacher was doing his sermon, you'd get someone and go, "Praise God," or "Thank you, Jesus," or whatever. But generally speaking, it was relatively, calm affair. Whereas when I went to the Open Bible church, you got people jumping up and down and their hands in the air and speaking in tongues and, all sorts. And it was much more of a celebration as well than a stolid observance of faith. Anyway, but I never really got to believing in God the way I should. I never really believed in the virgin birth, for example. I had arguments with my pastor about it. I said, listen, the only reason they said she was a virgin is because if they said she wasn't a virgin, then there would be question as to whether or not it was really God's child. It could have been Joseph's child. So she had to be a virgin, so no one thought it was Joseph's child. It's just a story, I said. And he would assure me that, no, it was really a virgin birth. But I never believed it. I just thought it was like a cover because, you couldn't necessarily discount the possibility that it was a human child if you didn't say she was a virgin. So, to me, it was obvious. Just, something they had to make up for the benefit of the faith. But, so I never believed in that. I also never believed in the resurrection, which is kind of important if you're going to be a Christian. But I still held on to the teachings of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount is full of good stuff. And a lot of the things that Jesus said to his disciples in the Bible, I had a Bible where everything that Jesus said was written in red ink, and everything else in the Bible was written in black ink. So I used to pay a lot of attention to the things Jesus said, and I liked the things that Jesus said on the whole, on balance. But I started getting further and further away from the faith because I saw so much hypocrisy in every church I attended. I went to about 5 or 6 different churches over the course of 3 years. And they all seemed to be full of hypocrites, people who said that they believed in Jesus and the Word and whatever, but didn't actually act like they said Christians were supposed to act. And I found that all of my Christian associates in church were among the most judgmental people I've ever met in my life. And since to me, one of the most important messages Jesus had for people was not to be judgmental, I found the hypocrisy intolerable, and so I stopped going to church. I still called myself a Christian nominally right the way through the 80s, even though I really wasn't one. And from about 1986 onwards, I started learning about other religions and so forth. And in 1987 or early 88, I can't remember the exact time, I was doing some ecstasy with some friends. And I had a little bit of a hallucination where I was sitting on a log by a river, and Jesus came up and sat down next to me. And I said, "I'm sorry, Jesus, but this just is not working out for me." And Jesus told me that if I wanted to be a good Christian, I should study Buddhism and try to follow the way of the Buddha. And, I still laugh about that when I think about it now. It was a hallucination, of course it was. But it's really funny because when I started reading Buddhist scripture and understanding what Buddhism was all about, it really is true. I mean, if you want to be a good Christian, try to follow the teachings of the Buddha, and you'll be a much better Christian than you will be if you follow the Bible. It's a fact. Anyway, but it made me realize that I just couldn't in good conscience call myself a Christian anymore, and I never, ever really bought into the whole idea that there is some being somewhere in the universe or somewhere in existence that created everything out of its own imagination. So in a sense, I guess you could say I was never really a Christian or never really a theist. Because, I was a Christian without even really believing in God. I believed in Jesus, but I didn't believe in his divinity. I didn't really believe in God. So, was I a Christian? I don't know. You can call it for me, Jay. I don't know what to say about it. But I came to understand what happened to me in my salvation moment. I was basically overcome with a whole set of emotions. There was the whole feeling of expectation there. My girlfriend's mother was right next to me praying, and you could see her lips moving, and I knew somewhere in my subconscious that she was praying that I would get up and be saved. I'm quite sure that there was quite a few people around me who had become acquainted with me who were praying like mad for me to go and get saved. And I'm not saying their prayers worked. I'm saying I understood that they were doing so, and I must have felt the pressure subconsciously. I think there was an awful lot of environmental factors going into why I launched myself to my feet like I did and went and confessed myself as a sinner. The moment, though, was transformative. And had I followed it through with, I hate to say it, but blind faith, I might still be a Christian now. The fact is, though, there were certain things that I just couldn't really sink my teeth into metaphysically. The virgin birth, the resurrection, the idea that, God is Jesus and Jesus is God and so forth. I mean, the whole thing just stank to me. And as I say, when I held up the very, very admirable teachings of Jesus against the behavior of most of the Christians that I saw, I just thought the whole thing was a farce and was completely disillusioned by it and have been ever since. So yeah, my salvation moment was just that. It was a moment. It didn't really last very long. Changed me, and for the better, but not in the way that you might think. Anyway, so there's my story, Jay. I hope you liked it. This is Got That Funk. Thanks for hanging out, guys. And until next time, may all your ups and downs be ups.